Uh, Good morning and good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us today at this very important discussion. I'm Indo Saxena, Chief Operation Officer and Senior Fellow at the Consortium of Indo-Pacific Researchers. Today, we are going to talk about uh, America's China strategy. And formally, the title of this conversation is Deterrence to Deal Making, Assessing America's China Strategy. As we all know by now that President Trump, second Trump policy towards China is somewhat different than the first Trump. And the second administration, US second administration continues to recalibrate the America's posture toward China. And I say that something different that we saw COVID in the first Trump, but and President Trump's backlash to China, saying the Wuhan virus to, and even the other our Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he was a China hawk. Now they are just taking a approach that is managing the relation with China. And now the analysts and researchers are divided in two groups. So what is this? Is this the deterrence strategy or deal making? And today we are going to discuss this. We saw the summit, Beijing summit, where President Trump travels to China, and that was summit was kind of without any joint statement. Both leaders agreed to some points in the cooperation with the like some commercial cooperation, agricultural products, and some kind of like a rare earth material cooperation that is very important, crucial. Without that being joint statement, I mentioned the questions over Taiwan arms sales and the Indo-Pacific strategy that recently we saw the reverting the name of the command still poses the questions: what is a straightforward, what is the explicit strategy towards China? And recently, we heard that President Trump was praising China of not getting involved in Iran, in the Iran's issue and the Iran conflict with the U.S. And he was admiring Xi Jinping personally multiple times. This panel together brings together three distinguished experts with complementary regional and disciplinary expertise: Southeast Asia security studies, China's global engagement strategy through the lens of the Western Hemisphere. We know that Professor Alice is with us, and on the ground diplomatic reporting from Washington and across Asia to assess whether America's China strategy is coherent, durable, and capable of reassuring allies while managing competition with Beijing. This is just setting the stage. Now I would like to introduce our today's panelist. We have Dr. Mark S. Kogan. Dr. Kogan teaches in the Kansai Gada University, Osaka, Japan. His research focuses on Southeast Asia and the broader Indo-Pacific region, security studies, peace building, counterterrorism, and human rights. A former United Nations communications specialist with field experience across Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the Middle East, he brings a practitioner perspective on regional security architecture and multilateral cooperation in Southeast Asia. We have Professor Evan Alice. Dr. Alice is a research professor of Latin American Studies, U.S. Army War College, and non-resident senior fellow as America's program at Center of Strategic and International Studies, CSIS. Dr. Alice specializes in China's strategic engagement with Latin America and the Caribbean, comparative politics, transnational organized crime. A former member of the U.S. Secretary of State's policy planning staff, he has authored more than 280 publications on Chinese global engagement, strategy, including 5 books, and has testified before the US Congress on Chinese activities in the Western Hemisphere. We have none other than Mr. Ken Mariasu. Ken is a senior fellow at the for Greater Asia at Hudson Institute. Ken has covered US-Asia relations for more than 2 decades as a correspondent in Tokyo, Washington, Cairo, Beijing, and in New York. His reporting focuses on the political, military, and economic dimensions of US-China tensions, the US-Japan alliance, and the Taiwan Strait. He was the last journalist to interview former Israel Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. Welcome, all of you. And before I invite you, your comments, I'd like to announce that the views expressed here are personal, should not be constituted to any organization and institutions. We have the set of the questions, and the audience who are not able to attend at this time, they can just watch our recording that will be published later on the website, consortium website, and the YouTube and the social media post as well. So before I go to the set of the questions, I would like to ask you your brief 2-minute remarks on the title and the topic, whatever you think. What's your first thought on this topic? I would start with Dr. Corgan. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's nice to see you again, and I see some familiar faces. But Dr. Ellis, of course, was the first time that we met each other, and your resume is impressive. Uh, I feel inferior. No, it's a compliment. Your resume is spectacular. Uh, the topic is very very interesting. And one of the things that I was thinking about just before I came was um, really where we are nowhere on deterrence, and I think we're nowhere on deal making with the United States with respect to China. And I think that the summit, Trump's meeting in just a while ago, was very much a great indicator that deterrence is dead. That Taiwan, for example, can no longer guarantee a safe or its safety, its own survival through any means of deterrence because of the conflicting messages that it's receiving, and deal making. Um, I think that that is pretty much off the table, and I think that Trump's leverage with regard to China has been either overextended or overused, and you can see this with the blanket tariff regime that he had tried to implement, which is now considered largely illegal by the court. So, well, my 2-minute response is simply this. We have not gone from deterrence to deal making at all. We are nowhere on both. We're talking about the United States foreign policy towards China. Yeah.
Professor Alice, over to you.
Thanks, and for me as well, it's a real privilege to be part of this panel, and with Mark, with Ken, with yourself. I would actually have to echo Mark's concerns, and these are certainly my personal opinions. But I see that there is some progress that is made in certain areas. Certainly China understands that it continues to be vulnerable to its dependence on the U.S. market. It continues to be vulnerable in certain select areas with respect to the supremacy of the dollar. But in my judgment, China has been doing a pretty effective job of trying to manage tensions while it is diversified away from some of those vulnerabilities. I think you see it in the advances it's made in AI with some of the new the progress on the chips as well as AI itself. I think you see it in the diversification away from of U.S. dollar holdings and increased reliance, in some internationalization of the RMB. I think you see it in other just a range of other areas. And I think I would agree with Mark on deal making. My concern is that there are a series of individual deals. When you look at the interests of Elon Musk or Tim Cook for things of interest to Tesla or of Apple, or certainly the Jensen Huang with the sale of NVIDIA chips. But in many ways, one can make the argument that even as China diversifies away from the reliance on U.S. chips, the ability to continue to get access to not only the H200 chips, but also some of the mid-range chips, essentially that benefits China while it benefits the companies that traveled with President Trump, but not necessarily a strategy by the U.S. And reciprocally, you say, really, how much progress are we making? You can say in rare earths a little bit of progress with respect to places like the Dominican Republic, a little bit with the USA rare earths, a little bit with respect possibly to areas like Sierra Verde in Brazil. But these are really incipient, and so my fear is that the effectiveness of the U.S. strategy, versus the progress that China is making of reducing its vulnerabilities from interdependence as it as it keeps tensions low. I fear that China is winning the long game right now. So I would unfortunately have to concur with Mark.
Thank you. Ken, over to you.
Hi. Yeah. I think it's very difficult to try to guess what Donald Trump is thinking. One of the glaring deficiencies of this administration is that it's very bad on messaging. Nobody can really explain what President Trump is trying to do, because nobody knows what President Trump is trying to do, and nobody wants to take the risk to explain it. That's why everyone is puzzled.
Exactly right.
So I think the key here is to put yourselves in the shoes of Donald Trump and see the world from his eyes and just listen to the concrete things he's saying. And I think there are several things he has made clear. One is that he doesn't want to send troops, US troops, into Iran. That's very clear. Two, he has said repeatedly that there will not be a war with China, at least during his term. And I think that's very set in his mind. And thirdly, he has no time for India. He has no time waiting for India to come on the US side. So he has distanced his with India. So these three are the pillars of his strategy. We get it wrong because we look at it from Taiwan's stance or India's stance. For instance, Taiwan, they want to believe that the US will come to defend Taiwan from China, and that, without being spoken, somehow that they hope that the US will one day help it become independent. That is not the US strategy. The US strategy is to support a peaceful resolution of the cross-strait issue. That could be unification, that could be a negotiated separation, but it's not to actively force an independent Taiwan. So you have to distance yourself from that. And as for India, India somehow believes that because it's the world's most populous country and it's a rising superpower, that it has to be important. But from I think the thinking among the Trump people is that we don't have time for that. The threat from China is real. We cannot stake our strategy on something that might happen in 15 years. So everything is like what we can do now. And in that now scenario, India is not in that picture. So I think we have to see things from Trump. So my first opening statement would be that.
Thank you, Ken. Yeah, just taking your one of the comment, no war with China. I will take this in another question. Like when we see the General Admiral Pepperau's statement that the 2027 and the clock is ticking for the 2027. Like he stated that China will occupy anyhow Taiwan by 2027. So we'll see if China does so on President Trump's term or doesn't. So I will take this in another question, but before, let me move to the next question and to Dr. Kogan. If we see, like, from all of you are agreed on your one part of your initial comment that it's not kind of deterrence, but or a very, very less deterrence strategy, and deal making is not as much profitable, where China is gaining or China is showing its superiority in various domains. So if deterrence is being subordinated, what message does this send to the treaty allies partner like Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines and Australia, who have built their defense posture around assumptions of American resolve? That Ken already mentioned this little bit, touched on this. Dr.
Yeah.
Kogan, what do you
So,
think?
so what message does this send to treaty allies? I think it's all transactional. I think that's really how you frame it. And I think there's a difference. There's the national security strategy from 2025 and the one from 2026 that have a very different language. The language is obviously burden sharing, and you see that obviously with Taiwan. You saw that with Secretary Higgs' remarks at Shangri-La. And the wealthier allies in Europe obviously need to take sort of greater responsibility for regional defense. And the U.S. has sort of chastised and ridiculed allies who depended upon the U.S. For their defense, see them as weak. So it's very strange. But this is very upsetting to a lot of people in Asia, particularly with regard to South Korea, with regard to Japan. So the message that it sends is very conflicting. So this also should send a chill up the spine in the Philippines, I think, as well. So at the same time, of course, I think the new NDS is interesting because when I was reading this before, it doesn't see China as maybe, how do I say it? It sees it as more of how do I say it? Um, has to be deterred from domination. It doesn't want to strangle, it doesn't want to humiliate it. And it doesn't have any sort of explicit over-the-top language in it. And particularly with regard to Taiwan. And that was a message, I think, that was clear in the Biden era national security strategies. And I think this is sort of what you call kind of a softening, sort of like a softening of the rhetoric, which I think isn't really matched with Trump administration officials. So what's really happening here, you have rhetoric that's set in the national security strategy, and then you have rhetoric that's being voiced by Trump administration officials. But they don't match. And there's this downplay of confrontation, and then there's, of course, this deterrence of Chinese coercion. Of course, at the same time, these messages don't match the reality on the ground. So, whether you're in Japan, you're in Australia, or anywhere like that, it just means you have this sort of capability. I mean, the U.S. is still the most capable power in the region, but uh the predictability of that capability is less guaranteed. So there are only sort of, like, I guess I think we call it like conditional deterrence guarantees that the United States is placed on. And you see this I think in some of the defense cooperation stuff that's been going on with Japan and Australia, Japan and the Philippines, and India and Japan, they are basically saying, hey, we kind of have to sort of like hedge our bets a little bit with regard to this security cooperation, because we can't necessarily count on the United States to a certain extent to come to our rescue. And when I think the rhetoric says, hey, you are being unfair to us and we sharing all the costs, suggests that the United States is also going to step up. So I think that if you're looking over my shoulder here, I think that Japan, it's one of the things it has to contend with in this second Trump administration. And that's what it's doing. It's trying to solidify its own defense capability. And that was one of the things that Takaishi was doing when she went to India. It's like, okay, we needed to sort of like secure the economics, secure the biogas and things like that. But we have to sort of talk about the capabilities of technology sharing, artificial intelligence, diversification, the partnerships, and we need to become less vulnerable to a dependence on the United States, particularly on this swaying kind of rhetoric or the political moods in Washington, D.C. So I think really you see that as a pretty big worry for the Japanese. Now, of course, a little bit to the north, you have the South Koreans. And I think that's a kind of a, what do you call it, an alliance trap. So it's saying, okay, you have to shoulder more of the deterrence against North Korea, while also you have to align yourself with the United States in terms of technology and sort of decoupling yourself from the Chinese supply chains. That is very, very risky because there's less of a guarantee of American backing. Um, so I think that I'm not a Philippines expert. That's not my strain. But I think that for the Australians, I think you got to mix the Australians into the mix as well. I think that they're kind of doing the same thing that the Japanese and India and some of the other partners are, where they are hedging against a scenario where U.S. extension of the deterrence becomes conditional on this sort of transactional thing, and they are prioritizing different options. And you see that in other areas of other sectors like economics, where they're saying, hey, we have to decouple ourselves from China, and we have to reorient ourselves towards the broader Indo-Pacific. So the messages that allies receive is simply mixed messages. And what they're really saying really is we have to hedge our bets. We can no longer guarantee the United States as a strategic partner, and we can no longer guarantee U.S. deterrence, or they're going to back up this deterrence policy.
Thank you, Dr. Kogan. On this, I want Professor Ellis, your comment, and Ken, if you want to give the brief comment on this, what's the message for the allies like Japan in Asia? You're muted.
Oh, you muted. Okay.
No, I think I share Mark's concern about the way in which allies clearly understand the value of the U.S. as a security partner and the continuing interdependence with the U.S. in trade and technology and other things. Whether you look at the Quad or other, certainly no one wants to offend the United States or cut those relationships. But I would agree with Mark. There's this kind of dual character that shock is translating in little by little into hedging and in diversification, both in the trade and technology and military alliances. But I don't think that anyone is looking to go away from the United States, but rather respond to the perceived mercurial nature, the risks that have been exposed to try to diversify. And I think strategically that diversification undermines U.S. influence, U.S. policy positions, and frankly, interoperability and things like that, and U.S. presence in the Indo-Pacific over the long term. So for me, it is a concern that hedging, even while I think there is a sincere desire to continue to engage with Washington to the extent that that's possible, both now and in the future, certainly thinking with many, I think, till 2028. Do countries bet on 2028, or do countries, realize that they may be in a new reality? And I think everyone's kind of navigating that kind of managing of risk and trying to read the tea leaves of the U.S. political system.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, Ken, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think waiting for Trump to go away is not a strategy. He has been elected twice, so it's a reflection of the American frustration to the post-war system where America was expected to be the world's policeman. Obviously, the quality of life in America, in Central America, not Central America, in the Midwest of America, has gone so down that there's a wide realization that America cannot continue to spend its wealth and blood to maintain order like it did before. So obviously, allies have to adapt to that reality. In 2020, Peter Zeihan wrote in his book called Disunited Nations that the American alliance used to be everyone basically in the world, but then that has shrunk to potentially useful partners, now down to obviously useful partners, and then down to the obviously loyal, and now down to those with little choice. I think it's very important for Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines to
Very well
be
done.
humble and recognize that these countries have no other choice. There is no plan B to go to China. So it's not very fruitful to complain about what is happening in America. The strategy should be to adapt, to find ways to help America continue to be the leader without burdening the American taxpayer. And there are ways to do it. I'll talk about it later in the show.
Sure. Thanks, Ken. We just talked about what is the message for the allies. Now, I will just move a little bit in the Western Hemisphere towards Dr. Alice. We saw that I heard President Trump speaking on July 1st in North Dakota. He was just talking about Panama Canal. He said that, quote, we won't let China to take Panama Canal. And to my direct question to you, we saw a conservative turn in the Latin American countries, and the leaders are elected, the President Trump, who endorsed them from 5 Latin American countries. I'm just naming, spanning Colombia, Honduras, Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia. Does this act as a sustainable barrier for Chinese development financing, or just a rhetoric aligning with a kind of geopolitical alignment, or they are just banning China for investing or their economic integration? Further, do these new governments in Latin American countries favor the objective of the donor doctrine?
Sure. I think you have a variety of opinions, and the opinions in Latin America that are spoken and the alignments that are occurring, versus what Latin American countries are actually calculating, or why they have the governments that they do are all different. But certainly you have the Shield of the Americas. In many ways, I consider the Shield of the Americas kind of like a U.S. Belt and Road Initiative. In other words, it's a declaration of a desire to cooperate without any real in any real obligation. And so, for example, you saw in the statement when the PRC was trying to bully Panama over its Supreme Court ruling, that some Shield of the Americas countries signed on and others didn't. You saw a broader coalition that signed on with respect to Bolivia. And so I think more broadly, there is something called the Americas Counter Cartel Coalition, the ACCC, but that is more focused on transnational organized crime issues, but even that is more is relatively limited in terms of what it obligates. I think what you have in general in the region is a group of countries now, of course, with the addition of the newly elected governments in Colombia with Alvaro de la Espriella, and now in Peru with Keiko Fujimori, an expanded coalition of countries that have political and other reasons that want to cooperate with the United States. And I think with many, it's their center-right governments that see that cooperation as strategically important and important to their base. But it's also of note that even the left countries in the region, so Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico strongly wants to cooperate, but in part to save USMCA, which is because 90% of Mexico's exports go to the United States. Even Brazil with Lula is trying to be restrained in how anti-US he is, because he's trying to position himself as not too far to the left in Brazil's upcoming October presidential elections. But my point with all this is, I think what you see is there's a desire to align with the United States in some way, and there's an unprecedented number of countries that are doing that, and in many cases that is for internal political reasons. You can say that Jose Antonio Cast in Chile won the election in part because of Chile's fear of the hardcore Communist Party coming to power there with the alternative candidate Jaula. You saw a similar situation in Ecuador, when there was a fear, that the candidate that represented, the left and the citizen revolution movement would have brought populist Rafael Correa back. And so, in many ways, the shift to the right and a cooperative stance toward the U.S. in Latin America is more about internal fears and internal ideology and frustration over insecurity. But certainly it has brought a group of countries that is interested in cooperating with the United States. And in many ways, that I would go back to, I think, Ken's excellent comment. You see a mirror of that in Latin America, those who cooperate, because they must. And in many ways, I think there are countries in Latin America that are sincerely aligned with President Trump. I think there are others who would are trying to avoid offending the U.S. while continuing to get the goods. And you see this type of maneuvering even with very pro-U.S. Jose Antonio Cast in Chile, who, while being very closely aligned with the U.S., also indicated that it doesn't want to damage its economic relationship with China. I mean, after all, 90% of Chilean cherries go to China, 75% of all Chilean copper exports go to China, 75% of Chile's incipient rare earth industry goes to China, and even the new pro-U.S. incoming government of Keiko Fujimori in Peru will have similar problems. I mean, the vast majority of the new mining activities in Peru are, China is dominant in the electricity sector. It's dominant in the telecom sector. The development of the new port in Chancay operated by COSCO is critical, to where Peru goes in international logistics. So my sense at the end of the day is it's not a matter of accepting the Donroe Doctrine or not. It's a situation where you have this unusual but significant group of countries that are disposed to cooperate with the U.S. They try to avoid some of the more insulting or distasteful aspects of it and find ways to get along and align themselves without jeopardizing their key economic relationships with China. You see certain things where countries from Argentina or Chile are avoiding accepting PLA personnel in their military academies, but they're still continuing the exports and contractual relationships. So I think there's a delicate dance going on in Latin America, but certainly there is a group of countries that wants to cooperate with the U.S., but not necessarily out of fidelity to a Donroe Doctrine, but more for their own interests.
Yeah.
Wonderful, Professor Ellis. I'm glad that you mentioned USMCA. That on July 1st, President Trump declined to renew it. What are the immediate impact of this to the neighboring countries?
What happened, and that's a very important thing, and in a very predictable way. Basically, President Trump, who negotiated that himself in the first administration, saying that this was the best deal ever made, now said, okay, technically, what has happened, there's a 10-year clock, and so it's very likely that a future administration, both on the U.S. side and on the Mexican side, will renegotiate. So things are not falling apart. In many ways, this is a better deal for the Mexicans, and it's a better deal for the United States, because if Mexico had negotiated a deal now with the Trump administration, they would probably get a pretty bad deal. If there's a Democrat administration, frankly, the Mexicans will probably get a much better, more generous deal in the future. And if if one takes a cynical look from the Trump administration, it wouldn't have made sense for the U.S. to give Mexico a pass for the next 16 years, because by having, annual reviews, which is going to happen, which is what we go into now, it basically puts the, Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico in a situation where she has to continue to toe the line on immigration, on narco trafficking, on other things, on, imposing, tariffs, as has been done on, Mexican imports of intermediate goods from Asia. So Mexico in Sheinbaum will continue to have to essentially toe the line every year as they negotiate, which is probably advantageous from the perspective of, the Trump administration's use of its power over Mexico to get what it wants in a variety of different areas.
Thank you, Professor Ellis. I want to comment your comments on from the other panelists, Dr. Kogan and Ken. Do you want to comment on this? Anything you want to share? Or we can move to the next questions, because this was the Western Hemisphere, and I know the Professor Ellis is a very expert on this. Let's move to the Ken for the next question. Ken, it's on the Taiwan, like President Trump's statement that he would make a determination while he was returning back from China on that trip. He said in Air Force One, went to the reporters on a question of Taiwan's arms sale, that he would make a determination on Taiwan sales, followed by his public call for both sides to cool down Taiwan and China, has been read as either strategic ambiguity or strategic drift. Which is it, and how should Taipei interpret Washington's signaling?
Yeah, so I think clearly President Trump sees this Taiwan arms sales as leverage towards Beijing, and I think it should be seen in that context. China, of course, is weaponizing rare earth exports as its leverage, so it's only natural for President Trump to look for alternative countermeasures, and I think he has identified that Taiwan arms sales is that. And then you have to think of what Trump is trying to get out of China. I think it's a mistake to think that China is the #1 foreign policy priority for this administration. It is clearly not. Trying to settle the war in Iran and the war in Ukraine are more important to this administration. And I think Trump sees China as leverage or part of that picture, part of that puzzle. I think he wants China and India to stop purchasing Iranian oil and Russian oil, and that would starve up the money that they need to continue their operations. So this is a very Trumpian way to settle these the wars. Like I said, he clearly doesn't want to send troops on the ground and to repeat what George W. Bush did in Iraq. So in that context, he is trying to use this Taiwan arms sales as leverage to get China to do what he wants, and that is to help in the Iran and the Ukraine. That does not mean to say that he has shifted from deterrence to deal making in China. I think I've had a discussion with Dr. Ellis about this, about why America wants the Panama Canal, for instance, is very much strategically with a future battle with China in mind. So I don't worry about that part, but to somehow this Taiwan arms sales in Taiwan especially has been interpreted as like a litmus test of how committed are you, Mr. President Trump, in defending Taiwan's like autonomy, and the answer to that is he really doesn't care. Yeah, so that's how I see it.
Thanks, Ken. Before I invite Dr. Kogan here for his comment, I just want to correct myself, because I earlier said that the admiral, not the current admiral, but the former admiral, was Philip Davidson, like Davidson window for Taiwan, like it's 2027, that China will attack on Taiwan by 2027. So, Dr. Kogan, just your comments on Taiwan's arms sale and what the Taiwan see this this partnership going ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that I think that Ken's comments are well read and quite strong, actually. But for the Taiwanese, I think that this puts them in a little bit of a predicament. I don't think that they like to be seen as leverage, or the arms sales like to be seen as a kind of a leverage. They're not a pawn in this sort of geopolitical chess game between the Chinese and the Americans. In fact, if we take a step back, right? Uh, the big departure for me was when before Trump was reelected, before Trump 2.0, there was a big delegation of defense industry people going to Taiwan, and we're saying to them, look, we need to help you. We need to have a partnership to help build Taiwan's defense industry. It's kind of a nascent defense industry. I know Taiwan is developing its own drone industry, and it's developing its own capabilities. But they relied heavily on American weapons for years. And it's making Taiwan go the other direction. So there was this motivation. I wrote an article with Jagadeth Panda on this just recently in Asian security. So there's a movement towards F-16s, movement towards F-35s, and now they're sort of trying to rethink, thinking, okay, well, what's the next move? There was a movement towards the Abrams tanks and the Patriot batteries, all this sort of stuff. And I always thought that was a little bit suspect. But the tactic by the Biden administration was sound. Is that we need to help Taiwan build its own defense capabilities, its native defense, I mean, its own industry. This has been an about phase by the Trump administration. And what's really happening is they're creating a dependence on American defense industries, and holding up arms sales is an impossible challenge. So I think what really needs to happen is that Taiwan needs to be more serious. I guess it's responded in kind by saying, yes, we will up our game when it comes to defense spending, and they have done so despite the opposition clamoring about this and it causing internal political turmoil for them. They've tried to increase the capability, the military readiness at the expense of the internal politics. People don't want to be drafted. But hey, you got to serve 2 years. You can't serve 6 months because, hey, it takes time to prepare for these sort of internal challenges, these particular kind of the theater of war, this invasion kind of scenario. So this is crazy. I mean, I don't like to use these sort of like hyperbolic terms, but for the Taiwanese, I think that this just shows you how far things have gotten out of hand since Trump's election. This temporal marker where this, hey, let's help Taiwan to build its own defense industry, to where we are now, has really put them in a very, very difficult position. And I don't see this resolving itself anytime soon. I really, really don't.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, sure.
Please do.
Yeah. I think talking to the Pentagon officials, well, I'm no longer a journalist, but when I was a journalist for Nikkei, I did talk to Pentagon officials, and from those discussions, it's clear where this Trump administration's red line for Taiwan is. And they are clear that if China tries to invade and occupy Taiwan, the US will sink all the ships coming across the Taiwan Strait. They will shoot down the planes, and they will do everything they can to prevent a landing. And once the Chinese land, they will help the Taiwanese fend off the Chinese and prevent them from establishing a foothold on the Taiwanese beaches. But that's the red line. If the Chinese establish a foothold and then they start to occupy in Taiwan, and then the requirement for the US to reverse that would have to be a rapid escalation to the nuclear level. And of course, Trump will not authorize a nuclear attack to make that happen. And future Democratic administrations will probably not either. So the message from the Pentagon to Taiwan is you have to do everything you can to prevent that landing. And if you look at the $11 billion arms sales that were conducted last December, they are not F-16s, they're not F-35s, and they're not Abraham tanks.
Right.
They are ATACMS, there are HIMARS, there are Javelins, everything to prevent the landing. So the message is very clear, and it comes down to whether Taiwan is on board with that.
Yep.
Thank you.
If I could jump in
Yeah.
also, because I think this is a very important point, because to me
It
it
is.
goes back to some of the issues that we addressed in our opening comments as well, which is for me the interdependence of some of these issues as you try to negotiate bargains, and thus some of the strategic vulnerabilities of transactionalism, especially when you're operating with a more essentially streamlined Department of State, streamlined National Security Council, as has happened in Washington, D.C., when so much of this is the individual kind of calculations of one particular leader. So I think this issue of President Trump wanting to use the arms sales focused on his negotiations with China, but neglecting how that sends certain messages to the Taiwanese and frankly messages to the Japanese and the Koreans and others about questions of will the U.S. defend and how credibly will the U.S. defend Taiwan in the future. And in many ways, you see, I think overall, Xi in China very intelligently playing the long game. Let's reduce tensions. Let's chip away at the things that have been, forever our strategic goals. Reducing Taiwan's ability to defend itself. Eliminating U.S. vulnerabilities, or Chinese vulnerabilities, whether it's in currency markets or parity in things like chips and in AI. Maintaining our leverage in rare earths, trying to cover things like dominance or vulnerability in agricultural by diversifying to partners like Brazil, et cetera, even while continuing to maintain the promise and hopes of U.S. companies like Cargill. So I think to me this is an illustration of the ways in which the interdependence of these issues makes the transactional approach. It creates some, I think, very serious vulnerabilities that I think many of us who are strategic, looking at the strategic consequences, are, I think, deeply worried about. And I'm sure that the Taiwanese, as was pointed out by Ken, are just absolutely apoplectic about this.
Good word.
Yes.
And it's not just the geopolitics. And I just think that the thing that gets lost here is the domestic political audience. This is consequential. The message it says to the average Taiwanese, this is very, very dangerous.
I move to the next questions. I know that Ken touched upon on the India's role and what the United States thinks about India. That please consider this in this question your comments on the reverting the command name too, if you want to say something about that. So my direct question is to you, Dr. Kogan. Secretary Rubio has called for a Quad produces tangible results, the quote, rather than being a social meeting of friends. Can a result-oriented, deliverables-driven Quad coexist with an administration that prefers bilateral G2? Because as we know that we saw the last summit president in Beijing, and now President Trump is excited to welcome Xi Jinping in US in this fall. And then again, at the end of the year, President Trump may visit to the APEC conference and will meet President Xi Jinping again. So while the administration preferred G2 and deal making with China over multilateral coalition building, what's your thought on this one?
Yeah, I'm so deaf. I can't sometimes hear what you're saying, but I know you asked a question to me, and I heard a few words. So I'm assuming you're asking the question about
so how the Quad
argument.
Quad
I
is
got you.
sidelined and over the
Yeah.
G2 and deal making.
Yeah, I got you. So this idea that the Quad has to deliver the sort of tangible results, and it can't be what do you call it, a social meeting of friends. I just think that is um, a reflective of a broader Trump administration critique that multilateral formats, or these mini lateral formats, if you want to call them, are underperforming relative to this harder form of deterrence, or at least what their expectations are for them. And I think that speech or whatever he gave, I don't think it's very specific, and I don't think that there's a lot of room that says, okay, the Quad has to double down and deliver tangible results, and I don't know what they expect from them, whether that be in infrastructure, critical minerals, whatever. Um, but I think that the there can be some movement here, right? And I don't think that maybe the Quad has to kind of like institutionalize or anything like that, but a kind of deliverables oriented or an outcome oriented Quad can exist. I think it can happen, but as what do you call it, like a subordinate instrument. Um, and it's a really hard thing to do. But I think that it can have a portfolio of different projects or mechanisms. It can be useful in shaping different environments around China. Um, it can be useful in a kind of um, bilateral deal making, if it requires a kind of excuse me, de-escalation in certain areas. Um, but I think um, Rubio and the Trump administration, this transactional logic, right, doesn't work with multilateralism or minilateralism. So they encourage them, right, when they produce visible gains. But um, they themselves reserve the right to repackage or trade off different initiatives when they're trying themselves, I think, to negotiate with Beijing. And I think that this sort of like pattern of, short deal making, right, is interesting. So I think for a lot of people, um, there's what do I call it? Maybe a credibility gap. It just sounds a little odd because for particularly for Japan and for Australia and India, they're not sure whether or not the Quad commitments that they make will be insulated from what you call these sort of bargains between the United States and China. So what this really does, it reduces the value of the Quad as a deterrent coalition, and it reinforces their drive to pursue what they've been doing, right? Which what Chekichi was doing in India, which is securing these sort of hedging arrangements, and then they're strengthening themselves accordingly. Japan has had to move very, very fast with this. Right. So I think that this is a problem. So, a results-oriented Quad, can coexist with Trump's ridiculous preference for bilateral deal making, China, Russia, with Russia, with China, but it's only if it's a toolbox, like a subordinate to this transactional style that he has with China. So I think in the Trump world, the only thing that Quad can do has to be sort of filtered through American calculations, uh, with regard to what it can do vis-a-vis the Chinese, and that's problematic. But if I were to shorten these remarks quite considerably, because it's very, very complex, I just don't think that the Trump administration has much appetite for the Quad. And I don't think, particularly Trump 2.0, doesn't have much appetite for the Quad. And I think it's more of a trio than a Quad. And I think that the allies realize this and are acting accordingly.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, please. Dr. Kogan. Okay.
Yeah, that was a comment. I didn't know what else to add. I'm just saying that, like, look,
Okay.
the issue is simple, right? They want a lot. They want outcomes from the Quad, yes,
Got it.
but I don't know how they want outcomes, but also at the same time tend to prefer bilateral negotiation, bilateral efforts instead, this G2 kind of thing. And I don't think that the Trump administration particularly values the Quad, but it rhetorically likes to say it wants more from it, right? That is problematic. Yeah.
Thank you. I want to hear from Ken. Ken, I read your article that reverting the name of Indo-Pac-Com, and then you mentioned that, and you just said that US can't wait for 15 years for India. And with adding that one of the US senior officials, he was speaking in Delhi, and he said they don't want India to be the next China. So they have fear in mind about India, or India should be nervous, like Indo after removing the Indo from the Indo-Pac. What do you say, Ken? And then I will take Professor.
Yeah, so the problem with the Quad that it's selected, the members are selected from the Western point of view. Specifically, it was started really by Shinzo Abe. He wanted to unite the democracies of Asia to counter China. So he wanted a way to bring in Australia, bring in India, but he didn't personally like South Korea. So South Korea is left out for no logical reason. But this really ignores China's strategic thinking. So I think from around 2010, the argument in Washington is that the Indian Ocean is going to be the center of gravity of geopolitics going forward for two reasons, because India and China, the up-and-coming superpowers, will inevitably clash in this seas. But more importantly, number two, China will continue to depend on the Middle East oil, and that oil has to go through the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Malacca, all of these choke points in the Indian Ocean. So the Indian Ocean will be full of the PLA Navy trying to secure its choke points. This was the guiding principle of this Indo-Pacific thinking. But 15 years later, this is not the case. The Indian Ocean is by no means the center of gravity of geopolitics. And that's because China, I think, has been gradually trying to escape the Indian Ocean. It's moving away from the Malacca dilemma. It's trying to build pipelines throughout Central Asia to Turkmenistan, to Kazakhstan, to Russia, so that they can secure their energy from there, and then also lean on the middle corridor that goes through the Central Asian states through railway, so that they have an alternative route just in case the maritime corridors are shut. So this is China's thinking. And if you look at that China thinking, the future is Xinjiang, the future is Central Asia. But if you look towards India, India and China are blocked by the Himalaya mountains. China cannot build any pipelines to India. They cannot build any railroads. So India is irrelevant in China's long-term strategy. So that is why I think all of this is happening. The real Quad that we really should be thinking to contain China would be Japan, Kazakhstan, Turkey, and actually Pakistan, because this prevents China's exits. China's exit towards the Pacific, there's 9 routes for the PLA Navy to go out to the oceans. 5 of them pass through Japanese EEZs. All the railroads go through Kazakhstan. They have to go through Turkey to go to Europe. And then Pakistan is the southern exit to the Arabian Sea through Gwadar. So to prevent China's strategy, those are the quartet, 4 countries that should be talking to each other, and maybe with the US, they should become a quintet. But in terms of Quad and India, I think that path is dead.
Okay, Professor Alice, your comment on this.
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect on the renaming of Indo-PACOM to PACOM. And I know talking with some of my colleagues in this, there is some speculation that I really can't resolve here, to what degree, this reflects, a changed attitude by the Trump administration towards India, as was pointed out by Mark previously. But I think there's a broader issue which just has to do with a kind of return to names and, return to pre-Biden era base names and pre-Biden era, which is not necessarily meant to be a strategic statement, because I can tell you that now PACOM has spent a lot of effort trying to reassure our Indian partners that no, this is not an intention to say that India has become less important to the United States. And of course, Ken notes that there are good arguments to be made about who should be strategically important, but I think it goes back to something that Mark hinted at, and it. Without being too critical, I think part of the difficulty is certainly there is this strong desire by the administration, the Trump administration's team, to harvest benefits without necessarily wanting to put in the level of binding commitment that allies need to be willing to make those things. I mean, you can only get so far in coercion. So I think in many ways, what we're seeing kind of is the strategic fraying of some of these things. Nobody wants to move away from the United States, but it's like any relationship. You can only get the benefits that you demand so far if you're not willing to show yourself committed to the relationship. And I think that's the overall strategic tension I think that you're seeing in the Pacific and elsewhere as the administration tries to push forward this America First policy.
Great. We are running out of time, and then we have the last question.
Like an abusive marriage.
Yep. And then we have the last question here, if America's China strategy continues to oscillate between deterrence and rhetoric deal making, of course, until the President Trump is there, and what does the Indo-Pacific security and economic order look like in 5 years? And which regional actors are the best positioned to shape that outcome on their own terms? Yeah. Go ahead, like any of you, like Professor. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll jump in very quickly. And first of all, in general terms, I think even before the current Trump administration, you saw a fraying of the liberal order. You had a number of states which I would call, part of the diverse illiberal counter order, which were empowered by China. But I think certainly the U.S. transactionalism has, and basically the U.S. defunding and attack on institutions has accelerated that process. And of course, you have in a number of different places partners that are hedging their security guarantees. We've talked about it in the Asian context, but certainly in the European context with respect to what is happening there. To a certain degree in Latin America, you see a more cynical calculation of trying to be on the good side of the United States, but trying to navigate, continue to do business with China. And so what I suspect is that you're going to see international institutions like the United Nations, which in some ways are more shaped by Chinese bureaucracy because the Chinese are, adept at lawfare and things like that. I think you're going to see a significant move away from the dollar, but still, there are limits to how far China can, without making the renminbi fully transparent and tradable, how far it's going to get. But I think you'll see more of that through things, at the technical level. Frankly, one of the things that I want to call out, I'm, although I'm not a technologist, but I'm increasingly impacted by the coming technology revolution, which frankly is being led in many ways by China. If you look at what is being achieved in robotics by companies like Unitree, which may or may not have the jump over Elon Musk and his gambit with Tesla. If you look at where China is going with artificial intelligence, I mean the latest ZAI model, some have said, is actually already above the capabilities of some of the banned U.S. models. If you look at where China is going with some other things, again, it's not the China great, but my fear is that we are in the process of a transformation of the global economy in which, in many of those sectors, whether it's robotics or AI or electrification, that China is setting the standards. And so its leadership in the institutional order, in the military order, will be driven also by some of the good bets it's made, and frankly complemented by some of the leverage it's secured in other areas, whether that is with respect to things like rare earths, where again, the U.S. has made limited progress, getting away from those vulnerabilities. So I think what we're going to see in many ways is a very different order, with a frankly reduction in U.S. capabilities.
Yep. Dr.
Yeah,
Colgan,
yeah,
I guess
I echo your comments, but I think that I'd like to respond by
that
talking
process
about.
of reorganization. And there's going to be some uncertainty
You
based on
finish
what
it?
happens in the November 2026 midterm elections in the U.S., as well as on the 2028 elections. But I think that scramble will frankly continue to define the new strategic landscape for the next 5 or 10 years, if not longer.
thank you, Dr. Colgan. Would you?
I'm sorry,
No.
I thought he stopped. It was just an
He was
audio
frozen,
problem.
I guess. There was.
I apologize for interrupting. I did not mean that. But anyway, I was saying I would like to talk a little bit about Southeast Asia. It's not really so much about the actors that dominate. And I think I would echo your comments, but about artificial intelligence and technology. None of the Southeast Asian countries, so the ASEAN countries, are in a particular position to shape the outcome on their own terms. And that is simply because of they're so different, and they face fundamentally different challenges. And they really do depend on stability from very predictable partners, with regard to the Japanese, the India, and of course China. And you can see that in the relationships between the Myanmar junta and the Chinese. They're also their dependence upon the Cambodian depends upon China, sort of this continual bandwagoning. But with regard to technology, I think it's a really, really important point, is that I've talked about this on other forums before, is that when it comes to AI and AI governance, Southeast Asia is being left behind. And I'm not talking about Singapore, because Singapore is a completely different class country, because it has obviously the manpower, the workforce, the technological capacity to develop it on its own. But really, what's going to happen here is that Southeast Asian countries are going to become consumers of AI, but not producers of AI. Right, and that they'll be really wholly dependent on Chinese models and everyone else, and that's catastrophic. So the underlying AI infrastructure, the technology infrastructure in these countries is woeful at best, and the funding for it, if you compare Thailand and Vietnam to where Singapore is, they're just nowhere. So really, I think what's going to happen if AI and technology, robotics, continues to shape the global economy, I think the biggest outcome will be massive economic inequalities in Southeast Asian countries, the countries that are unprepared for this technological revolution. And this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for the Japanese. This is an opportunity for India. And I think India is looking to Japan for some leadership on AI. But there's an opportunity that I think that the United States should not miss out on. And that building AI capacity in Southeast Asia is a way of hedging them against complete dependence on technology from China.
Thanks, Mark. And now, Ken, your comment on this. Then we have one question from Chris. So, Ken, your remarks first, please.
So the question would be, what would the order look like in 5 years?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think Japan has to learn from Israel. And Israel is preparing for a day when the US will be less engaged in the Middle East. And they've arrived at India. And I think Israel first thought of which other P5 countries could it turn to, because they really want the veto in the UN to protect them from the hostile United Nations resolutions. But they looked around. The UK would always probably be with the US, so that doesn't count. So they have three options: France, China, and Russia. China would definitely not stand up against the rest of the world to defend Israel. That's just not the nature of their diplomacy. Russia looks increasingly hostile to Israel, very pro-Palestinian in this Gaza issue, and the French really cannot be depended on to defend Israel. So they've arrived at India. And, you know, when J.D. Vance last week criticized the Israeli ministers in a very harsh way, saying that these cabinet ministers need to understand that Donald J. Trump is the only leader in the world who is sympathetic to Israel, Netanyahu came out immediately and said, that is not true. We are friends with India. 1.4 billion people of India support Israel. And he has a point. And when Modi went to visit Israel, I think in February, for 2 days, he was given a red carpet treatment. He gave a speech in the Knesset. Netanyahu and his wife went to greet him at the airport in the first day, went to see him off on the second day. And when Bibi was sending off Modi, they embraced for 17 seconds. You can see it on YouTube. It's very long. But Israel has clearly made a choice that India is the partner. And for India, Israel is convenient because it can offer India advanced defense equipment without India having to take sides, whether it's Russia, China, or the US. India wants to be multi-aligned, and Israel gives them the high-tech defense equipment while maintaining that framework. So Japan has to look for somebody else like that. And my answer is Turkey, or Turkey, as they would say, because of the things that we've talked. I think Turkey is in a critical geography, and as China moves away from maritime trade to land trade, the importance of Turkey really emerges again. And Turkey is the leader of the Organization of Turkic States in Central Asia. This, compared to Southeast Asia, there is so much more cohesion and unity because they come from the same ethnicity, the same language background, the cultural, very contrasting with ASEAN, which is 11 countries with different religions, different backgrounds, different languages, and most importantly, difference of distance from China. So for Japan to kind of try to turn to ASEAN to build a coalition of friends is very difficult. I think it's much more convenient to go work with the Turkic states in Central Asia and kind of sandwich China as bookends of Asia. So that's how I see it.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Chris, you have one question, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Fascinating conversation, guys. I really appreciate all the perspectives. It's a two-part question that kind of centers around the what we discussed with UMCA earlier, is how much does some of these dynamics that are playing out that we've talked about affect AUKUS? So that's part one. And then part two is with the fraying of USMCA, at least that's what I heard from you all. What opportunities or how is that viewed from Beijing, and what opportunities does that increase opportunities for People's Republic in North America, particularly in Canada and Mexico? And so that's for everybody to take, or anybody to take as you wish.
Since it's USMCA and Western Hemisphere, I'll start out. First, I would say that in general terms, I think China is trying to take advantage of this perceived U.S. lack of reliability or bullying. You see that with some of the initiatives with its global civilization initiative, but also its application of its global governance initiative to the Western Hemisphere in the most recent white paper and in other things, and also its bilateral diplomacy. I think in the short term, China is actually harmed by what's happening with the negotiations because Claudia Sheinbaum has put additional tariffs on both Chinese and also imports from other Asian countries, which were really coming into Mexico and being used in kind of CKD assembly as a pass through into the North American market. So in the short term, that continued uncertainty actually probably continues to hurt Chinese companies. But I think more broadly, it feeds to a broader narrative. And I think those countries that can diversify, you see, I think Brazil and others, are continuing to go full speed ahead with at least the commercial part of that relationship and in critical industries. But yeah, so I think again, it's a mixed message right now, but I think China is unable to exploit the particular, it's not going to be trading that much more with Mexico, although clearly Claudia Sheinbaum has made signals towards China, just as Mark Carney has in Canada. I think their ability to expand that role is going to be limited in the short term, but strategically the effects are significant in the long term, in my judgment.
Oh, if I could add on AUKUS, I think AUKUS is interesting because it really ties in the UK, Australia, and US for 30 years. And in similar ways, Japan's frigate deal with Australia is very similar. It ties them for 30 years. And this is really emotional for the Japanese people because Australia had a choice between Germany and Japan. Germany with lots of experience exporting frigates, Japan never, ever before. But the Australians made a choice. The future, Japan and Australia see a common future, especially vis-a-vis China. And they made a choice for this 30-year partnership with Japan. It's really a quasi-alliance or even more than that. And it's the first time since post-World War II that any country has actively chosen Japan as an ally, because the US-Japanese alliance is a little different because it's an extension of the war and the extension of the occupation. America never really chose Japan as an ally. Australia is different. Australia made an active choice among other candidates to identifying Japan as a 30-year partner. So I think this is very strong. If this frigate deal between Japan and Australia could be extended to India, for instance, that really brings India into the mix. That kind of really strengthens the Quad, rather than these leaders meeting every as a Quad summit every time trying to find topics that they can agree on, like space or cancer moonshot. Rather, this real 30-year commitment to build frigates together. This is the kind of thing that will really make the Quad meaningful. And also, the US Studies Center in Australia has already proposed that the Quad countries should share their shipyards and ports so that all four countries, whenever they go to these fellow Quad partners, they can use those ports for maintenance and resupply, even rearm. So that's a kind of way to I think, make the Quad, AUKUS, and these bilateral treaties, deals really lock in the relationship.
Can I say something that's somewhat not unrelated? I have to say this because I'm afraid that there's a huge issue, and it's somewhat related to the other question that we haven't addressed, and it's the elephant in the room. The thing that I think could shape the whole Indo-Pacific, reshape it, is nothing we've been talking about, and it's climate change. Climate change. And I'm tying it back to China because I contributed a chapter to a new book about the Tibetan water tower, the Tibetan plateau, and the catastrophic changes that are happening in the Himalayan region related to climate change, and all the impacts that the water towers and the residual effects, all the downstream countries, all the countries that, I mean, we're talking about, Nepal and India and Bangladesh and all the countries that have these sort of ecosystem services benefits and natural resource benefits from the water tower. And the impact that this is going to have on China alone with regards to agriculture, rangeland, temperature relocation, internal migration, all that stuff can be absolutely catastrophic. And as a security issue, I think this has not been really well discussed or well framed. And yeah, I'm not so sure. I mean, this is probably a ludicrous suggestion, but if there's one thing that the Quad should really agree on, I know the United States, save the United States, and maybe act as a trio, is that the transformative, in a negative sense, the transformative effects of climate change, negative effects of climate change on the whole region should not be underlooked. And I think they are, and we are simply distracted at the moment.
Thank
I
you.
have
Thank
something
you.
to say.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I have actually a climate change security proposal. So if you look at
Good.
China's strategy, I said China is escaping the maritime trade routes in the Indian Ocean towards these pipelines in Central Asia. But I think they will come to the conclusion eventually that these pipelines are vulnerable too to airstrikes in a time of war. The only source of energy that China can sleep comfortably with is coal, because 80% of its coal comes domestically, and they have a huge exporting neighbor, Mongolia, who can provide the coal. So I have a feeling that China will eventually just be more dependent on coal. And this actually fits into China's strategy of escaping the Indian Ocean. They've been trying to move away from oil. They've been trying to have renewable energies, nuclear energy. And the one thing they cannot replace oil is vehicles, cars, gasoline. And in that area, they've been pushing electric vehicles. And that electricity comes from burning coal. So coal and Mongolia are key elements that allow China to escape the US Navy. So my suggestion to a future US Democratic administration, it won't happen with the Republicans, is to go full climate change policy, to join with the rest of the world to ban coal outright. And that would really strangle China. And I think that's the kind of way to bring in climate change in a real hard-nosed security aspect.
I agree.
Yeah. Thank you, Ken.
Or at
And,
least develop proper energy infrastructure to assist others who cannot do it. Yeah. The clean energy infrastructure, which is lacking everywhere else. Yeah.
But to this administration, we have beautiful coal, so we can't think on this timings. So thank you, Dr. Kogan and Ken, especially bringing this climate segment to the topic. And I hope we can plan another panel on this one, so or the maybe that can survive the Quad. And I would like to thank you, everyone, and because that was very insightful and very crisp.
Very
What was the title? Like according to the title we just framed, and it's most updated, up-to-date discussions today. Thank you again, and thank you so much for participating and for your time.
You're welcome.
And I look forward to continue this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.